So Tim Rice, when the first part of your autobiography was published 15 years ago, you named it "Oh, What a Circus."
Right.
Are you still enjoying the ride?
Well, I suppose I am, yes, as much as I ever did. I love aspects of my work. Other aspects, sometimes you think, I'd rather be doing something else. But I think that's true for almost anybody in any profession, whether they're lucky in that profession or not.
In that same autobiography, you describe yourself, perhaps a little self-deprecatingly, as just as a sidekick to Andrew Lloyd Webber. Is that really how that relationship felt for you?
I don't remember saying that I was a sidekick. I probably did, if you've obviously done your research. I might well have felt that on occasions. But no, I think looking back on it without being arrogant, I think we both needed each other equally to get going.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think Andrew would have been a big success in theatre if he'd never met me, because I think he was determined to go into theatre. Whereas I think if I'd never met Andrew, I might well not have gone into musical theatre. I might have been a music businessman, or I might have somehow got into the writing game, if you call it that.
Do you think he believes that?
Well, I think he believes he would have been successful, yes,
Right.
because he was very, very determined to be the next Richard Rodgers. Whereas I kind of vaguely wanted to be a pop star, but I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed all aspects of writing, particularly humorous writing. And when I met Andrew, who was determined to do these shows, especially when we got onto Joseph, it gave me a chance to do something that I found I was quite good at. So it turned out that the musical theatre was a very good outlet for what I wanted to do, but it wasn't ever what I thought I would be doing.
You two,
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You two, of course, you produced some of the most popular musicals in history until you moved apart after Evita. Did something change in the relationship, the nature of it, or was
we had 10 very good years together with
Yeah.
Joseph, Superstar, and Evita. I don't think any creative partnership lasts much more than 10 years. I think it's time to move on usually. That wasn't what I thought at the time, but Andrew wanted to do Cats, which was very successful. But Cats didn't need a lyricist, and therefore, in one sense, I was out of a job. And we played around with one or two things that we thought we might do, but almost at the same time as Cats or immediately after Evita, but nothing really grabbed both of us. So Andrew went his way and I kind of had to go mine, which I didn't mind at all. I quite relished the chance to work with other people. And eventually we were both very successful with other people. So in a way, I think it was good that we split, because we'd had a good run. I don't think we would have done anything quite as good as the stuff we did when we were together. And I think we both did stuff that was pretty good with somebody else having split.
all the talk about perhaps a strained relationship or falling out, was that an exaggeration?
Well, there were undoubtedly a few arguments, definitely, a few ups and downs. But that was we had one or two, awkward moments even before Evita. So it didn't prevent a successful working partnership. In fact, most successful working partnerships depend on a bit of tension and differences between the two people.
And you don't regret not participating in the Phantom of the Opera, for instance?
Well, Andrew kind of offered me a participation in the Phantom of the Opera, but at that point I was already working on chess. And it was a little, I never quite gathered whether he really wanted me to do it or just a few songs. And to be honest, although the show was a massive success, it's not really my sort of show. I think, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking the show. I think it was a very good show, but it wasn't the sort of show I really wanted to do.
What was that?
Well, I wanted to do something that was slightly unusual. I suppose you could say Phantom was unusual, really, but I wanted to do this idea I had on chess, which was about politics, and it was a new idea. It wasn't an adaptation of something else, which many musicals are, and many things that I've done are basically that, and there's nothing wrong in that. But at the time, I very much wanted to do my own stories. And like Evita, I worked on that for quite a while before Andrew came on board. Chess was very much my own idea. So I think even if we'd still been together working, What Should We Do? I'm not sure we would have done Phantom together, because I doubt whether I would have agreed to do it. And once it was sort of off and running, then to be asked to come in at a moderately late date, when I knew other lyricists had been approached, I thought, well, maybe not for me.
Looking to the future, is it really going to be financially viable, do you think, to put on big shows which can only be seen by a few people sat in the audience?
Well, obviously, if it's seen by a few people, then it can't be financially viable. But I don't see why, if you mean by a few people, 1,500 a night, yes, it has to be financially viable. And I think shows are still successful. What I find a bit worrying these days, it's very hard to get a show off the ground, musicals anyway.
Well, that's it, up and coming.
With something that is brand new.
Yeah.
You've got to have, and I've learnt this the hard way from Here to Eternity, you've got to have something in the title or in the background story of the work that people identify with. Nearly all the big hit shows, including many of ours, like Evita had a hit record beforehand, Superstar had a big hit record beforehand, The Lion King had a big hit film. All these things give people a recognition factor straight away, and that's quite important when you're a tourist, or going for your one trip in London during the year, and you look down the list of what's on. You see a thing like From Here to Eternity, that meant nothing to anybody really. So that was a problem. We didn't realise it was a major problem until it was a bit too late. But I now have learnt that it is such a plus if you've got something going for the show which people can pick up just from the title.
What about, you mentioned going through the list of a London visit and sort of wondering what to see. What about making it more accessible and these live broadcasts around the country, live broadcasts of the shows in cinemas, for instance? Are you a fan of those?
Well, I'm in favour of live broadcasts of shows, but they don't yet, anyway, technically, or emotionally match going to the real thing. If you live a long way from London and there's a great show on in the West End that you'd like to see, then this is an awful lot better than nothing to go and see a filmed version of it. But especially if it's alive, if it's a film of the theatrical show. But I still don't think it begins to match the experience of actually being there. And I therefore feel that is it's a useful sideline, it's a useful extra, whatever you like, sort of a bit like a bonus track on an album. It's something extra which I'm all in favour of, but it doesn't really make up or equal the value of the real thing.
So when you worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber, was it simply a case of you writing the lyrics? In your case, that's job done. Andrew would write the music, or did you go back and forth?
No, the other way around.
Each other?
Well, in the case of Evita, and indeed of the other two shows we did together, the first thing to do is to get the storyline right, to get an outline, a structure of the whole piece, 20 minutes worth of synopsis. I mean, by that I mean, if you read it, it would take you about 20 minutes to understand the storyline. But we wouldn't have any lyrics yet necessarily, or maybe the odd title, and probably no music. So Andrew then takes this, a few sheets of paper. I'm simplifying it, and says, right, I'll write. He knows what sort of melody, what sort of tune, what sort of atmosphere to give each piece of music, because he's got the story, but he hasn't got any lyrics. Again, he might have a title. And then he will come back to me and say, right, for this big ballad, this is my tune, and I'll say, great, or maybe we can change it or whatever. And I'll then put lyrics to the tune. So it's story, music, lyrics. But at every stage, we're obviously working together, and he might say, well, I don't think that line's very good, or why don't we change the story a bit here, etc., etc.
It's interesting. How does that differ then when you worked on films you've done for Disney, for instance? Presumably the songs are written long before the animators.
Well, animation is a slightly different ball game, but there was a difference anyway working with Elton, in that Elton likes all the words first. All the great hits he's written over the years, every single one, has been written with lyrics first. And that's what happened with The Lion King. But again, with The Lion King, we had to have the story first. So I was at Disney an awful lot of the time, working with the script writers, deciding where songs would go, and sometimes we'd say, right, this scene doesn't work, that song's got to go. Well, we'll completely revamp things and eventually send off a finished lyric to Elton, which we felt fitted into the scene. Elton would then come back with a tune, and then if that worked, that would be it. Sometimes it didn't. We had to say to Elton, well, actually, this song isn't working, or we've changed the character or whatever. But it's always story first. You've got to get the story right, whatever sort of show you're doing.
And on The Lion King, how did you and Elton manage to ensure that what you wrote fitted in with the score by Hans Zimmer?
Well, Hans came along later, because what Hans did brilliantly was to orchestrate the songs we'd written. And he would, we would, it would be totally agreed, say that the song for Scar, just to take one that's not perhaps so well known, a song called Be Prepared, that was written, it was then recorded with Jeremy Irons in that case, and it would then have a wonderful Hans Zimmer arrangement, which was part of the score. Most of Hans's score didn't have any lyrics. I mean, Elton and I wrote all the songs, Hans wrote the bits in between, and he orchestrated the hits, in fact, all the songs. So he didn't really need to work with us particularly. He just needed to be handed the finished songs and the finished script. And indeed, to see he had to see the finished animation. Might not have been all coloured in, but he had to see exactly how long each scene lasted. Writing a movie score as opposed to a song, you're writing after the event of the filming, after the animation, or in a live action film, after the actual filming of what goes on. Whereas if you're writing a song for animation, that has to come before the animation, because the characters have got to sing it, and they've got to be lip synced. Not always. I mean, not every song you see the character sing it. You might hear it, as it were, ethereally, but it's a different role writing the score, i.e. the actual soundtrack music, to writing the songs.
Yeah. Hans, of course, has gone on to become one of the most prolific
He's great,
film
Hans,
composers.
very lovely guy.
What was it like then to work with him when he was still relatively unknown?
Well, I don't know if he was that unknown, even in 1994. He was just a great guy.
Perhaps compared to today, then.
Well, all right, he's a mega star today. No, I loved working with him. He's a very nice guy, very funny. We got on very well, and he was just a great pleasure to work with. And he seemed unassuming. He was a master not only of actual writing music, but of the recording studio as well. And Lion King was still recorded in the days when recording studios were slightly, a little bit bigger than your wallet. They were big rooms and everything. And we were working, of course, with large orchestras and choirs as well, which was very exciting.
I wanted to ask you very briefly about Frozen and what you make of it. Some people think it's the best Disney film since The Lion King. Have you seen it? Did you like it?
This sounds strange. I've only seen half of it, and not because I walked out or anything, but my daughter, my 15-year-old daughter, was watching it, and we were all gripped by it. I thought this is really a very, very clever film. And then suddenly about 9 of her friends came round, and we stopped watching it because we were halfway through it and they wanted to to play I mean, we were enjoying the film. So at the moment, as things stand, I've only watched half of Frozen, and I keep meaning to watch the other half, and I will do so very soon, I promise. I've got a copy of it finally. And what I've heard and what I've seen, I'm very impressed with, and it's quite clearly, brilliantly hit the audience. I would think it sounds to me, particularly every young girl, a teenage girl in particular, really can identify with the lead characters. And it's got a great song, or it's got several great songs, but it's actually got a hit song, which hasn't happened almost since The Lion King. That's not quite true, but it's been very difficult for the animated films to get big hit songs. And in recent
so many covers
times
of Let It Go now, aren't there?
Let It Go is a mega hit. Fantastic. It's a great song. And it's good. I think it's great that there is now a film, came out last year, of course, and won the Oscar, because the standard of songs in films was getting so low. For a while, I thought they were probably going to ditch the category. They talked about that. But Let It Go, I think, single-handedly has proved that a film can be a great venue for a new song. And I get rather depressed when so many movies, not animation in general, but so many movies, including some animation, tend to use old songs because they think that's what the punters want. Well, they do, but they're not being very adventurous. And if you can get the public interested in a new score, like we did with The Lion King when it came out, then it's so much better than just recycling, however brilliant, recycling old Beatles stuff or old Elvis stuff or whatever.
I just wonder if it's exciting, whether you're tempted at all to do another Disney film.
Well, I've said to Disney, I mean, the guy who, or the team who wrote Frozen, obviously, are now their hot team, and I would think they'd probably rather work with them than anybody else. But I'm still in touch with Disney because the Lion King show is on, always opening somewhere. A show I did with Elton called Aida is always playing somewhere around the world, and through Disney. And I've said to Disney, look, if ever you're desperate for a lyric, I'm around. But I'm not, too concerned. I had a very good run. I mean, I worked on Aladdin, which has just opened on Broadway. I did some songs for Aida. I mean, I've done quite a lot for songs for Beauty and the Beast on stage. So I've done an awful lot with Disney, but I'm happy to do some more if they ask me.
Amongst those, of course, a hugely successful career from which you've earned well. Does money make you happy? Has it?
Well, not in itself necessarily. I mean, it's a if you haven't got money, it's a bit annoying to see somebody with money saying it doesn't make me happy. I mean, in many respects, it does. It creates one or two different sorts of problems, and somebody much more wise and witty about this than me said, it's better to be unhappy with money than unhappy without money, and I think that's probably true.
You've done enormous work for charities and...
Well, I've done a bit. I mean,
especially in the field of education, I think. How tricky is it to judge what charity... You must get a fair few requests. What charities are worth supporting and what aren't.
You do get asked, anybody who's lucky enough to make a few bob and be successful is inevitably asked to contribute to worthy causes, and there are lots and lots of these causes around. Some of them are not that worthy, and it's very difficult at times to spot which ones are the ones you should help. And obviously one tends to help charities and causes which you have a sympathy with, which so in my case I'm very interested in bringing sport to schools, education, things like that. But I'm a bit of a sucker. If somebody asks for some loot, I'm usually certainly consider it. But there are a lot of charities out there which don't really achieve an awful lot, and I think one just has to be careful at times, not just spray money away all the time. I feel like most people with a few bob that I can spend money much better than the government can, and I'm quite happy to give a fair chunk of my cash away as long as I know where it's going. The problem with the government taxes is that you've no idea, you know where it's going, and half the time it's completely wasted.
You mentioned government. Where do you see yourself politically now?
Well, I'm fed up with all of them now. I see everybody in politics seems to be about 12 years old, and I don't think any of them have got much of a clue, but we muddle along. It's never really changed much in the 30, 40 years I've been aware of what's going on politically.
Was the difference...
Heath and Wilson, way before your time, Heath and Wilson were very much... there wasn't a lot to choose between them. Once the Labour Party gets into power, they tend to drift to the right. Once the Conservative Party gets in power, they often drift to the left. So they tend to meet in the middle, which is what most people, I guess, want. But I think one or two... one gets annoyed when politicians make endless points purely because they think that's what the voters want to hear. And I think they do far too many interviews. They apologise too much for cock-ups, all these things. But I'm just a grumpy old git now, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to that.
A grumpy old git, perhaps, with rumours that you had some sort of affinity with UKIP. Were they no more than rumours?
No, what happened with UKIP was, and this is an example of how bad the press can be, I'm one thing I am really anti are wind turbines. I think they are an absolute con, and they don't do their job, and all they do really is make people like me, landowners who stick them up on their land, which I haven't done, I hasten to add, make us better off at the expense of other people's bills. because huge subsidies, you can get paid. I've got some land up in Scotland, and I've been offered serious sums of money to stick one or two of these hideous machines up there, which, apart from anything else, ruin the countryside. I mean, for me, the environment is as much what it looks like as anything else. And if you have the number of times in this country now, you drive over a hill and you see 5 or 6 wind turbines, you think, oh no, they're awful. Anyway, to get back to UKIP, there's a very good man called Christopher Booker who writes in the Sunday Telegraph, and he's always banging on about the fraudulent climate change policies and everything of nearly every government, pathetically trying to be green. And they had a dinner with Christopher Booker was speaking at, and I was invited along. No, nothing political. I went to see Christopher Booker about 2 or 3 years ago, and he spoke really well. And at the end of the dinner, they said, would you like to, make a contribution? And I said, well, I'm happy to pay for my dinner. I'll even buy a table because it was a good cause. But they said, no publicity, nothing. You aren't joining anything. I said, fine, I don't want to join anything. But I did. They were the only party who's actually dared to say, maybe wind turbines don't work. Maybe there are better ways of solving our energy problems. Anyway, I gave them $2,000 or whatever it was for a table I bought to presumably paid for about 10 people's dinner, and forgot all about it. And then about 2 years later, I was rung up by some reporter on the Sunday Times saying that I'd joined UKIP and made a major contribution. And I was absolutely baffled. Then I realised it must be referring back. And some twit at UKIP had obviously said, oh, Tim Rice is now one of our supporters. Well, that aspect of what they were saying, although it was Christopher Booker saying it, I was all for. But I have not joined any party. I mean, I'm not even a member of the Conservative Party anymore. At least I don't think I am. But I like to support individual MPs who I think are doing, I think some MPs I know are good blokes or ladies, and some are pretty ghastly. I think UKIP will do quite well in the next election, and I think they deserve to, if only because the other parties have been so utterly useless.
The lesser of all evils, then, do you think?
Well, they ain't going to run the government, or at least certainly not in my lifetime. But I think to have they're a bit like a sort of hornet's nest. I mean, it's sort of quite good to have these people making Cameron and co look, and indeed Milliman, look over their shoulders and think, oh, well, maybe we aren't doing everything right.
One of the things you have done is to create your own cricket team, the Heartaches, they're called. Is cricket now, these days, a greater passion for you than writing?
Well, I don't know, really. It depends. I've always enjoyed cricket as a hobby, but I think if you let your hobby become your job, then I think you lose the passion for it. I mean, I think if I'd been a professional cricketer, which I would never have been, as I'm not very good at it, but then I think it would have become, as some cricketers who I know have told me, it does become a bit of a drudge, and you think, I can't face playing. And imagine playing cricket every day, virtually all the year round, as they do now, the top players. It must, after a while, especially if you lose a few games, must after a while become a little bit of a drudge.
Of course, recently there were 2 tragic cricket fatalities within a week of each other, I think. What did you make of that?
Well, it was just a terribly awful, it was an accident. It's one of those things that could have happened. I mean, accidents happen, and this was something which was a 1,000,000 to 1 shot, terrible. I don't think really it instantly means there should be any great change in anything. I mean, it's unlikely to happen again.
So no safety measures sort of review?
Well, what can you do? I mean, you could. It's a bit like, it's a bit like 9/11. I mean, you think your first reaction is after it happens, oh my goodness, we must build no more tall buildings, we must do this, that and the other. And in the end, you can't exist like that. You have to go back to normal things and let things evolve. But, I mean, obviously people will be looking into it, but whether or not that means you've got to change aspects, you'd say ban fast bowling or ban bumpers or make helmets so big that the batsman can hardly move, I'm not sure that will be eventually thought necessary. But the most important thing is that it's a very sad, tragic thing to happen to a very promising Australian player.
Penultimately, from an artistic point of view, which of your works are you most proud to have written? Oh,
well, there's always bits wrong in all of them, really. I think...
Is that what it is? Is it a case of looking and saying, well, actually, this has got the least wrong with it,
Probably
rather
is.
than, this is...
I mean, there's always certain lines in every show you think, oh, I wouldn't have done that today, but maybe if I had done it a different way, it wouldn't have been as good. It's usually things that don't quite rhyme. I think Evita's got fewest of the ones I did with Andrew of things that I would change. I think it's we kind of knew what we were doing by then, and it's quite well constructed. And there are on the whole a show that's got out. I'm quite happy with the words. But what makes a show a success isn't just a succession of clever lines or clever words. It's the overall impact of the story and the somehow the enthusiasm and the excitement that the story can build up, which is easier to get when you're young.
What about the other side of that coin? Do you ever get fed up of hearing your own songs being played?
In a way, yes. Certainly, if you go to an audition and you hear 9 people sing "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina," it can be a bit wearing. On the radio, if I happen to hear one of my songs on the radio, I don't think I'd turn off. I would think, oh, this is nice. A lot of people are probably hearing it at the moment. They're probably turning it off. No, I think one's always frustrated that you get the same. It happens with all, with big rock bands as well. So many radio stations only play the 3 or 4 biggest hits of any one act, and that's a bit frustrating. I mean, Procol Harum, you will only really ever hear "Whiter Shade of Pale," but they did some other great things, some of which are very successful, and you think people should have more imagination and play 1 or 2 slightly obscure tracks.
Yeah. And finally, we began by talking about the first part of your autobiography, which covers your life up until the opening of Evita.
Yeah.
So let me finish by asking you how imminent the publication of part 2 is.
Well, I haven't got very far with it, so the answer is it's a way off, I think. But I'm hoping to do this time next year, i.e. the end of 2015, I'm hoping to get a book of my lyrics out there, collected lyrics with a lot of anecdotes and funny stories about them. Ones that I think are good and ones that I think are not good. So it would be. It wouldn't be the main point, but it wouldn't be a sort of how to do it, because I'm not sure I do know how to do it. But it would be a how I did it, and how I often got it wrong and sometimes got it right.
Yeah. Well, it is long overdue. So Tim Rice, thank you very much.
For a copy.
Yes, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I think you mentioned in part 1 that you like being asked to name all 50 states in 2 minutes. Do you still like being asked to do that?
Not really. Well, only because I'll only get 48 and you'll go, oh, you can't do it.